welcome you all back to the panel. I'm actually very excited to be hosting this panel because one of my mentors is actually on stage. He is the one who teach me everything I needed to know about data center. So having worked in the industry for 30 years, I'm actually in debt to him. But we'll go on with other speakers today. So the first one, I do want to kick it off, need no introduction because we all heard of him just a little bit earlier, Gary Cook. He is someone I actually admire. There is a term, actually, I think we use it for UN, ambition does inspire. Gary is definitely one of the individual, lean in, lean forward, lean backward, lean everywhere in terms of really helping us to gain the awareness of the importance of actually doing something very important. It's actually doing the right thing and actually doing good. So in the course of we all build data center or we all service a data center client, we oftentimes need to remind ourselves what is really beyond ourselves that we actually need to think about when we actually talked about the data center. And I think Gary is definitely one of the individuals who inspired me over the years and continue to inspire me. So the first speaker I think I'm going to ask my panelists to talk a little bit about is Gary. You whet the appetite about Renewable 3.0. I too agree with you that if you're actually doing rack, you might as well just kind of give up right now because you're not actually helping the world, you're actually creating work. You're worse than actually standing on a treadmill. You may burn energy and calorie for yourself and make you look good, but you're actually genuinely not doing anything around you, anybody around you, any goodness. So you might as well just stop and conserve your energy, in my opinion. So that's the past. Hopefully people get that message. The second one is there's still a lot of synthetic product available, such as called renewable PPA or contract for differences. I think they're okay because they're actually helping not the data center industry, but you're genuinely helping the clean energy investment industry, I think. And I think you cheer for that. And I definitely have a conversation with Google or Microsoft or Facebook, all the five top guys in the industry, and saying that the combining of you all, you definitely have done more than probably about 8 to 9 gigawatt of incremental power purchase agreement or pushing it. And it's very respectful in that regard in terms of from a capital investment perspective. So Gary, question I have for you in Renewable 3.0. What may be the call to action that you think you would suggest to the industry that we can really genuinely make a difference in the next 24 months?
Yeah, it's not, yeah, okay. Yeah, certainly what we'll be focusing on as we go, so we've certainly asking companies to make long-term commitments to renewables. And when we started that journey, recognize it's not going to happen overnight. You're growing very quickly. It's getting renewables in line with that growth will take some time. And I think you've seen a lot of progress. I think it's actually probably a little closer to 10 gigawatts of deployment from the data center companies that have driven renewables. But we need to be looking at what is the grid changing, or is this demand, are you displacing, getting dirty energy off the grid? And so I think what we'll be focusing on increasingly the next Quick and Clean is how are companies, are they building infrastructure in places that is looking at 24/7 renewable supply by 2030, or are they on a pathway where they have big problems in terms of transition away from that? So there's ways to do that. I highlighted briefly, so like there's things they can do in terms of their own procurement, but a lot of this is going to be about how do we change the grid, the underlying grid that they're relying on. Is it the utilities are happy to okay, we'll do a big solar PPA in state X or Y, that's great. You're happy, customers happy because they get to claim renewables. You've helped us avoid our peak shaving, or that's expensive, but you're not getting the coal off the grid at night. And so to us, it needs to be about how can we build this digital infrastructure that is truly fossil fuel free and start moving that direction. It's not going to happen in 1 year or 2 years, but if we don't start having that be what the equation we're solving for, then we're never going to get there.
Thank you. So how many of you have heard of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Wow, it's more than 2%. That's pretty good. I think it was about 3%. Okay. For those of you who actually haven't heard of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, I encourage you to maybe go Google it. Just go to the UN site and type in SDG. It has a pretty canvas of 17 goals. Specifically, one of the key things that I do as an advisor to the UN for the data center industry is to actually map the journey of the next generation of the sustainable data center build into some of these goals and be able to harmonize effectively with the grid. So I think that brings me to the second speaker, who actually I think cannot be more appropriate, what I call a poster child, in terms of from a utility perspective and talking about that. So we all heard of Eric's CEO spoke a little bit earlier regarding how wonderful and thoughtful this utility has in terms of building out the businesses, right? So Eric, you are the president for the hydro distribution division, right? And your revenue is what, 12 billion a year?
Yes, bonjour, good morning. Yes, about $12 billion.
Yeah. Servicing about what, 4.3 million customer?
Exactly.
What is the market share of that for data center load?
We're talking in Quebec, we have about 40,000 megawatts of power. I would say right now there's about 350 that is hooked up on data centers, but we see growth going up to probably 1,000 megawatts in the future.
I hope so. I actually hope you're going to have a faster on-ramp given what we do here in terms of increasing awareness. I was particularly impressed with your background because you started the organization by running a customer-facing function, right, as a vice president for customer. And then you also do the other job that I think is really cool, is to actually be able to look for new technology to add to the grid infrastructure. So talk to us a little bit about the journey and your ambition of what you see from inside the utility, and then I'm probably just going to let you stop right there because I don't really care too much about looking at it from the utility perspective. I think we want to look at it from a customer-centric perspective. But let's start there in terms of you being the executive, growing up into the organization, leading the customer-facing function, very successful, congratulations, in terms of both economic growth and actually from a health perspective. Doing the right thing, doing good. So talk to us a little bit about how that come about. How does that inspire you guys, and how do you accomplish the strategic objectives that you've done?
Okay, yes, obviously new technologies, but just before I jump into this, because we talked about it just before, you have to understand in Quebec, like Eric said before, it's all hydroelectricity. So as a base load, we're well suited to accommodate other technologies like wind and solar. So we start from this. Today in Quebec, there's no economic incentives to move on to these new technologies, but we still started about 2 years ago to work with a combination of these different technologies, going from domotic, solar, wind, in different places on our grid, just to start playing with the technologies and prepare for the future. So I'll give you just some examples. We have a significant microgrid project ongoing that will be put into service next year. So that's something that's going to be interesting to use utility scale solar and storage, but also residential rooftops and so on. Up north in our, the only places where we're still burning diesel is up north, our off-grid systems. So there, obviously, we have incentives, again, to use these technologies, like solar and storage, to diminish our consumption of fossil fuels. So that's the technologies we're playing with. Now, for customers, like I said before, there is no current incentive to move on. If you come to Quebec, there's no incentive, obviously, from a financial standpoint to use these technologies. Some do, and we support them. But I guess we're preparing for the future where there's going to be that bridge between the current pricing in Quebec and these new technologies where prices are going down, as we know, very quickly.
Got it. I guess you probably were the best person to answer the question right there for our panel, right? How would the data center industry embrace renewable energy to meet the ever-growing demand for power? And if it's the case in Quebec, would you say, just bring it on, game on, because you're already ready? What took you guys so long?
Yeah, bring it on. There's a lot of potential for growth. A bit of background, like I explained before, 2008 to 2016 in Quebec, like many regions, our sales were very, very flat, stable. So in 2016, we put out a development team that started looking at new markets, like data center was one of them, blockchain, greenhouses, to attract them here. I think we have to make sure our product gets known more, because we talked about it this morning. Prices, just a few numbers usually that attracts attention, but prices in Quebec right now for major data centers, we're talking about 4 cents US per kilowatt hours. And it can go down with some options at 3.2. That's fully integrated generation, transmission, and distribution. So
It's all renewable.
all 100% renewable. So I think we have the right product. We have a lot of capacity as well. Right now we export 35, 36 terawatt hours to the US and surrounding provinces, but this can be used also to develop our own market with data center and other industries. So there's a good product and plenty of room for new businesses to come here. We also have a team. One of the big changes we've put together to be more business friendly, we have a team that works with customers to find the right location. We're the second biggest owner of the land in Quebec after the government. So there's room, land, good land, close to our network and power capacity. So we think there's all the ingredients to make this a success.
So Gary, maybe next time when you do 3.0, you can actually have a use case of Quebec. Game on.
There's definitely, as I mentioned, significant advantages. Where you locate your data center will fundamentally define the equation you have to solve in terms of getting a 24/7 renewable supply. So locating where you have existing baseload renewables, very important. I think you should also look at, if we suddenly did game on and scaled Montreal, where is that going to take us in 10 years? And sort of looking, I think it's important to look where there's opportunities to be adding additional renewables to the grid. Companies should do that, and then they can use the renewable baseload to match that throughout the day.
I do agree in terms of the incremental. I think that's of high value. So I would say, Eric, from a UN Sustainable Development Goal perspective, you clearly offer the affordable clean energy goal, and you do a check, in that regard. And hopefully we'll combine with the data center industry, which I spent 30 years in design, build, and operate. I think there's a way that you can actually harmonize it. So having your experience in terms of running a customer-facing function, perhaps your team would develop some domain knowledge in focusing on data center, because it is a little bit different than CI and R in that regard. We're kind of a funny bunch in that regard. Speaking of funny bunch, Peter is my mentor. So everything that I know about data center, the good lessons I learned, I'm in debt of him. The bad habits along the way, I pick it up myself, okay? So, well, Peter is actually the one that I think is appropriate that Bernard was too kind to give me the introduction. Everybody knows Peter Gross. If you don't, actually, you're probably not in the data center industry. So get to know Peter, then you'll be in the core. Peter recently started his new company, I believe, focusing on consulting. So I think this is really great news for the industry, because he allowed himself to spend the time that he actually does what he does very well in the industry for 3+ decades. Had a phenomenal success throughout his career. His last position actually was the Mission Critical Engineering Head for Bloom Energy. He joined Bloom before they went public, and then ride the wave and continue to actually help them to support growth for the customer, including one of them actually have the privilege to work with Peter on, and that's eBay. Prior to that, Peter also founded a couple other companies, including one of them called UIP, which actually still exists today, even though he managed to found it, sold it to HP, be the managing partner, run the whole entire HP mission critical business, and then spin it back out to actually be independent. So he certainly not only know about data center, but he also know about the financial market, how you actually play it, and be it on both sides. So Peter, welcome to our panel.
Thank you, Susanna. You make me blush. By the way, she exaggerates. I'm nowhere near, and she knows very little. If she learned data centers from me, I wouldn't say that because that means you know very little about data centers.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about data center. Let's see if he passed his own test, right? Okay, so Peter, we just started during the break and you start talking about it is very challenging for data center to be able to maintain the resiliency that we all know, 24/7, 365, less than 95 minutes downtime per year. Frankly, I think that number is going out the window, dating how old you and I are. In these days, it's always on and it's never down, right? Okay, so you know those minutes downtime is just out the window. It's just unthinkable that you actually might have even a data center be down. So given the challenge on that, and I know we are in Quebec today, but the data center is a lot broader than just being in this province. Can you maybe update us a little bit from your viewpoint, from a factual perspective? What do you see are the challenges for data center to embrace renewable energy?
Let me start by saying that I believe that this industry, the data center industry, takes social responsibility very seriously. If you look at, and I think Gary showed that if you look at the top 10 purchaser of renewable powers, six of the 10 are data center companies. The hyperscalers plus Equinix. Equinix is there, but also QTR is there, Switch is there. It's indeed, data centers take the whole issue of green power and sustainability very seriously. With that said, though, one of the most difficult things a colocation provider or a hyperscaler manager needs to face is how do you compromise? How do you find the happy medium between cost, reliability, and sustainability? It's a difficult thing. These are, to a certain degree, these are divergent issues. More reliability typically costs more money, and sometimes green requires additional investments. And let's face it, this is a very competitive business. You are in Virginia, and you're surrounded by 20 other competitors. You have to provide the right level of reliability. Your cost structure has to be compatible and competitive with your neighbors to the left and to the right. So what I'm trying to outline here, what is, in my opinion, what are the practical solutions to green a data center? We're not going to talk about RECs. We're not going to talk about PPA. It's just like Susanna said here very well. We are beyond that. We have to find solutions which are more practical and more effective. So, in my book, there are 3 ways that can be done. One is on-site generation. Just a piece of trivia. I don't know if anybody can ever thought about that. Do you know how many new sources of energy, new sources of power were invented in this world in the last 120 years, since 1900? Anybody? You'll be surprised. 2. One was the photoelectric effect by Albert Einstein in 1905. That's when he got the Nobel Prize, and Enrico Fermi in 1939, fission, right? So we don't have a lot of options. However, on-site generation offers a very interesting set of solutions. Don't know if anybody here heard of the data plant. Data plant was a white paper written by Microsoft a few years back that outlines their strategy, their blueprint for the data center of the future, for the Microsoft data of the future. And it's a very interesting concept. It will take some work and some developments, but essentially it says, I'm gonna be off the grid, I'm gonna create my own green dedicated on-site generation source, and I'm gonna have full control of my power destiny. I mean, that's the essence of the paper. And power and data, compute, storage, and network is integrated. That said, so I think that one of the most efficient and practical solutions, things that can be done today, and I believe could be cost effective in certain regions, and certainly will achieve this objective, is on-site generation. Whether it's some sort of generator, recip, or a fuel cell running on hydrogen or on biogas, provides that zero carbon solution, and at the same time provides a reliable, cost-effective source of power that will enable the data center owner to accomplish these objectives. The next thing that's going to happen, hopefully very soon, we're going to see some of these devices, primarily fuel cells, achieving a solution that will capture the carbon, either sequestration or carbon capture. This will again make these zero carbon and green. And I think that today those solutions are practical and that can be implemented. Imagine hydrogen generated by a solar plant or wind, where continuity of power is not essential, it's not important. Generate hydrogen and use hydrogen to generate electricity through a fuel cell. This is a practical solution, and depending on location, not in Quebec for sure, but other places, it's a cost-effective solution. The second ways to achieve this objective is using dedicated renewable with the proper storage. Storage is the big thing. To accomplish what we need to do today, we have to either solve the storage issue or build transmission line that will move solar power from Arizona to New York, which is probably, it's probably easier to make peace in the Middle East than build transmission lines in the United States. By providing the proper storage, and there's going to be another session later today that will specifically discuss the storage issue. Lithium-ion battery is not the answer. That's not gonna do it. The cost is too high. The volume is not there. So it's just to give you a sense of the pricing for something like this to be effective, we need to bring the cost below $50 per kilowatt hour. A Tesla fuel cell, the Tesla battery today is closer to $200, maybe $180. So it's a long way from there. But there are other solutions. We'll discuss as compressed air, pump hydro. There are some other things we can do. So that's the second option. And the third one is software-defined power. Software-defined power, and I think was mentioned, I think Gary mentioned that in his earlier presentation, this requires a global data center provider that has the ability to dynamically move workloads and applications throughout the globe, depending on where the power is available, whether it's sun or wind. You might remember Google wrote a paper, about 5 years ago or so, outlining this strategy. It's not here yet, but software-defined power and software-defined data center is approaching. It's getting closer to doing that.
Thank you, Peter. So what we actually share with you, if I can actually attempt to summarize, is the following. So first of all, I fundamentally believe that it's actually very important that you need to chart your own journey in a data center in terms of what it is that, where you are at, and where do you want to go. Linking up with individuals like Gary will inspire you to set the right ambition. So I would say renewable 3.0 is probably where you should be, because none of us want to look at where the puck was or where the puck is. Given this country is so nuts about hockey, you know what is important in terms of the great one said. You got to go where you anticipate is going to be. So many of the different data center, many of the folks come to me in terms of, hey, Susanna, how do you think the next generation sustainable data design is going to look like? What do you think are the design attributes, or where do you think site selection criteria need to be improved? I would absolutely think that you want to track with what Gary shared with us in terms of the 3.0. I assume, Gary, your slide is available, right, for others, okay? So if you don't have it, I would say take a picture of it and memorize it in terms of what it means for you. Because if you are talking to the next generation of data center, that's basically where they're going to be wanting to be. Second one is game on, and start coming into Quebec, and I think Eric and his team will probably be able to do a really good job in using, in my opinion, a portfolio approach in terms of supporting the next generation of data center that will require 100% uptime renewable energy. Would that sound about right?
Yes.
Okay. Your gap is basically the mine that folks just didn't think about Quebec. Other than my friend Vantage guy who comes here every other week. I thought he was actually nuts, but I actually think he is a genius in terms of he saw and experiencing for the client what it is, and he's very happy. Actively currently now sourcing another 55 megawatt for Vantage, okay? So he certainly break out from the crowd. So you don't necessarily need to be number one or number two in Equinix and, or DRT. Vantage definitely see the light, and genuinely, I think, have been experiencing uptime, renewable, and achieving goal, leveraging your entire portfolio without actually spending any money. If not, I think they spend very little. Then the third approach, I would say, if you capture what Peter's going to say, I would say talk to him offline. I, too, agree with him. I spent the whole day at Microsoft last Friday, and indeed, the data plan concept is actually not future, it's actually today. If nothing else, if you want to kind of see that, drop me a note on LinkedIn. I can facilitate that discussion and actually have you see it live in Seattle. And that will probably going to get rolled out in other parts of the country. Naming one of them is actually South Africa. So I'm very bullish about that approach. On-site generation is amazing. It's sort of like Eric did it in terms of, hey, Susanna, is generation, distribution, transmission all inside your rack. Like, whoa. That's very impressive. And then I think the second and the third point. So with that, I hope that we actually give you some food for thought, that this is not about getting racks. I hope we don't never hear that. Imagine my analogy, you might be burning calorie on your treadmill, but you're actually not doing anybody else good. So get off your treadmill, because it just doesn't work for the community. Number two, for the synthetic product, it's very helpful in terms of from a financial investments perspective and helping a clean energy. But every kilowatt per hour, you're still emitting carbon, you're still generating emission, and that's probably not okay for the future generation. For some of you who like to know a little bit more, September 23rd and 24th, UN hosted the Climate Action Summit, and the entire stage was hijacked by a 17-year-old Greta. So go ahead and go to YouTube and type in Greta and climate action, and you'll see the video. She basically said that all of us failed her in this industry because we did not have the right ambition, which is why I want to correct the course action by leveraging Gary as our icon. And Eric is our poster child in terms of demonstrating what is possible today, and we just need to open up our mind in terms of being able to enjoy it. And the third one, if you actually genuinely to be inspired, Peter is phenomenally humble, but he is wickedly smart in terms of genuinely solving hard problems. So I hope actually this panel has been helpful to you. The only one thing I don't like about when I'm looking out the audience is one thing. How many of you can guess what I don't like seeing? You're beautiful all, okay? But this one thing really bugged me. Exactly. Would all the women please take a stand? And give them a hand of applause for being here.